Chairman, thank you very much. Truly one of the best experiences of my life was working on this legislation, rolling up sleeves, sitting at tables without cameras around, and working with good faith people on both sides of the aisle to do something that was very remarkable. And the accomplishments you laid plain here, and I think it should be celebrated, the success we've made. Democrats and Republicans coming together, a Republican administration who I got to know very well during the process. I think we have this falsehood that often rhetorically is heard here in Washington that somehow Americans are not equally concerned, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, about the safety of their communities. I come from being a mayor of a city which has Republicans, Democrats, independents, where the number one issue was public safety. I'm not sure if anybody here in the Senate, more so than me, perhaps equally, was on the ground in communities fighting for safer neighborhoods. I found out very quickly that the police leadership, from the FBI director to my local beat cops, knew that the solutions to security were not solely law enforcement, that in fact, they felt like they were treating symptoms of a larger problem. And it was a wave of using tools to create safety that clearly were not achieving it, because in the years before I was mayor of my city, we were the greatest incarceration capital, not only of the world, but in all of humanity. The United States of America locked up more people than any other nation or past empire when it comes to just the total gross amount of humanity that was being put into jails and prisons. The United States of America had 1 out of every 4 incarcerated people on the planet Earth. It had 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth. And yet during that same time, we saw the drug problem in America getting worse. And as a result of over-incarceration, hyper-incarceration, and doing things to people in prison, we saw remarkably high recidivism rates. When I became mayor of the city of Newark, I realized that just helping people coming out of prison, being that the recidivism rates were unconscionably high, could be one of the best strategies. And we started doing a whole bunch of other things to approach this problem. Now, it was particularly acute to me that this was driving racial disparities in our country, because incarceration rates amongst low-income communities and black and brown communities were incredibly higher than in other communities, even though rates of drug use or drug selling were no different between blacks and whites. It led to the unconscionable reality to me that not only were we the incarceration nation, but we incarcerated African Americans at such a high rate that there were more blacks under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1865. And to look around, when I became mayor in 2006, you started seeing examples coming from red states of people taking a different approach. Texas became a model for prison reform in 2007, when the state allocated funds for drug treatment, mental health, and rehabilitation for incarcerated individuals. The Texas recidivism rate fell, as did violent crime, dramatically. By 2018, Texas had closed 4 prisons, saving Texans $3 billion, and showed that you can lower your prison population and lower crime by focusing on empowering people, creating more beloved communities, and dealing with the healthcare issues and mental health care issues and addiction issues. Red state after red state were showing this. South Carolina passed major sentencing reform in 2010 and saw revocations for parole violations fall 33%, recidivism rates falling below to 13%, and the state's prison population went down 14%, saving taxpayers almost $500 million, and again, crime went down. Georgia, Republican Governor Nathan Deal signed prison reform legislation into law in 2012, and the state had one of the nation's highest incarceration rates, costing over $1 billion a year, but within 3 years of lowering their prison population, Georgia saw their crime dramatically fall. And Georgia also went on to enact juvenile justice reform and other criminal justice reforms that ultimately saw a 3.5% in its overall prison population decline from 2016 to 2012. And so it frustrates me when opportunistically we use issues of fear and understandable concerns about crime to drive wedges between our society, as opposed to looking at the practitioners out there in states and local levels who are actually showing a lot of success. As much as we'd like to think that ideas that were passed in the first step are somehow original, they're not. They came from Republicans and Democrats who just wanted to solve problems. And we didn't do everything that Georgia, South Carolina, and Texas did. We did not do all the innovations coming out of red states. We did some of them, and that's why we called it the First Step Act. And so today we herald a celebration. You and I, Mr. Chairman, have met with a lot of the families that had their liberated people from prison, reclaiming the ideals of our democracy, because the most sacrosanct aspect of our democracy, if you read our founding documents, we were formed for our own safety and security, for the common defense, and we were formed around the ideals of liberty. And so we could continue in this institution pointing fingers, damning and condemning, and adding to a culture of contempt, or we could get back to what ideas are working in states and cities, and how can we at the federal government do practical, common sense things to give strength and support to that. I sat last night with Denver's mayor, who's set remarkable records for eradicating homeless populations in his community. And he openly talked about the Republican business leaders he worked with finding practical solutions that, hey, had the secondary effect of limiting crime that's caused often in these homelessness encampments. And so I just want to encourage us. One of the best experiences I've had in my decade in the Senate was around this bill, working with people that our side vilifies, from Jared Kushner to Lindsey Graham. And they're working with people that I'm sure I'm not a beloved person in the media circles in which my colleagues on the other side operate. But we just said, let's come together and do what is already working, what evidence-based shows it works, and have the byproduct of lowering crime, lowering recidivism, and doing what this country was called to do, to create more beloved communities. I've gone to the homes of people who were released by this bill. You want to talk about family values? Reunite someone who is over-incarcerated with their children. You want to talk about stronger communities? People who are released by this bill are leading nonprofits in some of these communities dedicated to keeping other people out of prison. And so every issue that we sometimes opportunistically use to beat the other side, I promise you, as I sat down with the mayor last night for dinner, local mayors don't care about left or right. As Fiorello LaGuardia said, there's no Republican or Democratic way to fix a pothole. We on this committee could do more to get people access to treatment. We could do more to stop mental health people from committing crimes. We could do more to make our prisons places of empowerment and not compounding trauma. We could do more to help people who are hurting. We could do more in our country. Common sense, bipartisan work to solve problems as opposed to curse the darkness. And so this is a point of light. I celebrate it. But if this is the first step, let's do more. Let's do more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Booker. It's time for the next step. And I think we should be open